ESG is a top priority for business leaders in 2023 for several reasons. Firstly, while the EU has certainly gotten a head start as far as mandatory disclosures around ESG, there are more coming in 2023 with the EU New Deal and the EU taxonomy. There increases each year the list of disclosures that public companies in the EU must comply with. So that's especially topical and important. At the same time, we know that in April of 2023, we're expecting some more detailed information from the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US around forthcoming mandatory ESG disclosures for public companies in the US. All of this creates a compliance environment where ESG becomes top of mind. But beyond that, 2023 is an inflection point for other reasons as well. I think we've never been more aware of and concerned with the ways in which our companies are in alignment with the value systems and with the aspirations of the staff we wish to attract. And I think that that's an important part of the conversation that companies on the front foot are having with their staff complement. And that is becoming much more consultative and certainly more so than it has been in the past. Finally, I think 2023 also represents, certainly in the US, an interesting inflection point around ESG backlash and resistance. There's something to be said here about the ways that the conversation around ESG in the US has transformed over the last decade. When I first came back to the US 5 years ago, no one was talking about ESG in the common investment lexicon. In the last few years, it's become an important part of business differentiation and business disclosure. And as a result of that, there's arisen over the last 6 to 9 months quite a rigorous backlash to ESG in certain segments of the political and investment environment. And that's worth having a conversation about. So I would argue that this time for ESG work and ESG disclosure is more fruitful and interesting and loaded with consequence than any time before.
ESG Labs is a one-day event for clients who want to get on the front foot to understand more about ESG and its relevance and what it means to them as a particular business and their industry. We'll be sharing with them more about the art of the possible in terms of how to comply with from a system, process and people perspective with forthcoming ESG regulation, but we'll also help them understand how ready they are to become ultimately compliant as they need to do so over the course of the next few years. Ultimately, they're left with a plan and a roadmap covering people, systems and processes that enables them to take that first few steps into compliance for ESG. So the ultimate goal of ESG Labs is to leave our clients with an actionable, tangible roadmap for them to take the first few steps towards ESG compliance and what it means for them. How that breaks down is into 3 sections of the day. We take any inputs in terms of pre-work that's been done for ESG thus far. We start the day off with some visioning. So we bring some assets, ideas and thought leadership on ESG, art of the possible, and what other clients or competitors are doing in the market to work towards ESG compliance. We then have a rapid deep dive assessment of where the business is, where the finance department is today in terms of readiness for ultimate compliance with ESG. And then eventually we develop that roadmap and a really clear plan that people can take away from the day.
So the problems solved by engaging in the ESG Labs experience are many and varied. Firstly, compliance. So those in your company who are now tasked with honoring forthcoming ESG disclosure requirements are going to benefit from engaging in this process. The next area of benefit is operations and operational efficiency. Anyone who's responsible for ensuring that inputs in the company are used in the most efficient way possible, and that the company is running in a way that is not only consistent with international responsible investment principles, but also with its own bottom line in mind. Those kinds of problems and those kinds of ideas will be addressed. Next would be capital raising. These days there's such a link between your ESG performance and your ESG story and your communications protocol and your ability to mobilize capital. So for those who are on a raise, for those who are looking to leverage their ESG story in a way that allows them to mobilize resources and to fundraise, that will be an important part of the conversation. And finally, ESG performance has everything to do with creating a efficient, successful, and harmonious work environment. So much of what we do when we're thinking about ESG strategically has to do with staff attraction and retention. It's also about how do we attract the best possible people who are now more than ever conscious of their role in the professional environment and the extent to which their values are in alignment with their professional pursuits. So a great deal of our conversation will also be around how to attract and retain the right kind of talent using your ESG performance.
What can people expect to take away from an ESG lab? I really think it falls into three buckets. I feel it's one, ESG thought leadership between IA seminars and Vantage Point. Two, real alignment of your team around ESG objectives and goals. And three, a genuinely executable plan of action that you feel that you can take on and start to work with independently. Kate, I don't know what you might add to that.
Yeah, I think gone are the days where it was acceptable to issue core financial statements in one piece of communication to shareholders and then to issue an ESG report in a totally disjointed way. More and more table stakes are for integration. So I think financial professionals will leave the ESG labs experience armed with an understanding of the ways in which financial information and ESG information are in fact linked, and that the story of a company, if it's to be holistic, must represent both financial information and triggers and disclosures simultaneously to that which we disclose around ESG, and that really telling a whole story of a company involves both the financial and the environmental, social, and governance story of how that company shows up, the kind of impact it creates, and the kind of world to which it's contributing. Yeah, there's a common misconception that the industries that will be most affected by ESG disclosure requirements are those with high impact operations, right? Industries like mining and oil and gas and forestry and agriculture. But in fact, all verticals and all sectors will be impacted and will be triggered by forthcoming ESG disclosure requirements. It's just that their disclosures will be different and will be dictated by the industry in which they fall. So that which is required for disclosure by a mining or an oil and gas company will be much more rigorous and much more detailed, perhaps, than that which is required for a financial services or an insurance company. And you can imagine why that would be the case. There's just different triggers, there's different ESG material ESG information that flows forth from a company depending on its industry. So, the broad answer is that every industry will be affected, and no matter where you are occupying space in the market, it behooves you to pay attention to forthcoming ESG disclosure requirements. Well, Vantage Point represents a really interesting perspective on what's happening in finance and what's happening in technology. So Vantage Point is coming to the table with a deep bench of clients, customers, and experiences that have to do with technology, with the financial environment. And more so, they're also coming with acumen and information on ESG mainstreaming and how to integrate ESG reporting within the broader technology and finance reporting environment. IA Seminars is coming to the table after years of providing information and training and education around accounting, and finance, and now more recently ESG. So this is an opportunity to kind of bring together the worlds of theory and practice. It's a chance to bring together the disciplines of education together with the discipline of execution, and to bring together sort of the strategy and the tactical requirements of ESG in any company. So in fact, I would argue that this is quite a harmonious and quite an auspicious joining of forces.